Hello, welcome back everyone to Einstein's Eyes, where we shine a light on important health topics with clarity and insight. I'm Carl Rosen, oculoplastics and neuro-ophthalmology in Anchorage, Alaska for the past 30 years with my partner and friend, Jon Ditkoff. Jon?
Hi, all. I like the new intro, Carl. I really like that. Yeah, so I've been in practice for 30 years. Carl and I trained together at Albert Einstein, hence Einstein Eyes. I am a general ophthalmologist specializing in cornea, so a little bit different than Carl. I specialize in the front of the eyeball as he specializes around the eye with the eyelids and the bones and everything else. And when I'm on the other side of the world. So it's kind of nice to be able to meet up and talk to Carl regularly. But I'm excited for this guest that I've been hearing about.
Yeah, so I'm excited too. By the way, it is a beautiful day in Alaska, so it makes up for January and February. Yeah, because it is challenging during the winter, but today's a beautiful day. And Janice Lintz is a former classmate of mine at the Kennedy School. She has an MPA, JD. She's an attorney, I believe a retired attorney, but nevertheless has the degree. And the thing that impressed me about Janice at the Kennedy School was she was so passionate about hearing disabilities, hearing loss, and the surrounding elements that uh, involve that topic. I asked her to join us on the channel, and I was delighted, and so was Jon when she accepted. So we're really interested in hearing what she has to say and her thoughts and comments. So Janice, um, great to have you here, and the floor is yours.
Well, Carl and Jon, thank you so much for having me. And Jon, nice to meet you. I do have to just mention all views are expressed are my own and do not reflect the position of the department where I work. Okay, now that I've said that, ask away.
So tell me how this began, how your interest in this was kicked off, and your journey with hearing disability and how it's impacted your life.
Well, my journey started by happenstance. My daughter was diagnosed with a hearing loss. And as soon as the doctor diagnosed her with a hearing loss, she said, don't worry, there were special schools for her. And her idea of special schools and my idea of special schools were two different special schools. My daughter went on to obtain an undergraduate and graduate degree at an Ivy League school, but that was not the doctor's thought about special schools. And there was a point where I didn't understand why a diagnosis on a prescription pad suddenly changed the outlook of my daughter's entire life. And I was determined not to accept those crumbs offered to her. And so I decided at some point it was easier to change the world than to lower my standards. And I spent the next 22 years working on changing hearing aids and accessibility for people with hearing loss in the US and globally.
Fantastic. So can you just shed some light on the statistics of hearing loss? I know it impacts adults commonly, but also kids. Do you have any of those numbers by any chance?
Yes, and that's actually a more complicated question than people realize because it all depends on how you ask the question. And it's a good thing we took Deb's class in statistics at Harvard Kennedy School because I delved in a lot deeper into this than I previously did. And so the Census Bureau in 2021 asked questions such as, do you have a serious hearing loss? That is really a loaded question because what does serious mean? And does it mean if you have a hearing aid that the hearing loss you had without the hearing aid is not serious? And one of the questions is that at night, when you take your hearing aids off, you have a different level of hearing loss, or you removed your cochlear implant. People who remove their cochlear implant are deaf at night. And when they sleep, because you can't sleep with a cochlear implant. And many people, when they come into their home, they're comfortable. It's the same way we come home and we get into our comfy leggings or sweats. people remove their appliances because they feel they're home. They don't need to listen. And so what you need in your home is very different than maybe what you need outside. But yet that census question does not ask you, break it down that way. Also, many people with hearing loss may not know they have a hearing loss. So if you don't know you have a hearing loss, how do you know if you have a serious? So for example, I had someone knock on my door recently and I didn't hear it. And the person entered, it was the building, and the building entered my apartment. And they said they knocked. Now I'm dubious if they knocked, but nonetheless, let's say they did knock. I didn't hear them. If you ask, now I'm concerned, should I be going to get my hearing tested? Because if I didn't hear them and they really did knock, I now have a hearing loss. But if I didn't know, right, let's say I don't know that I have a hearing loss because I didn't know they knocked. So you get into that position of you don't know whether or not you have a serious hearing loss and what counts and at what time. So the numbers range from and the Census Bureau asks these ridiculous questions. And I worked with the CDC on this issue because I said, this is problematic. Plus it depends on who's crafting the question. So the recent, I told you this is way more complicated. The recent questions that were being asked by the Washington group asked whether someone had a serious hearing loss after they wore hearing aids. But when they asked people with mobility disabilities, do you have a serious hearing loss, a mobility disability? They didn't say when you use a wheelchair, can you still get in a building if there's an elevator, right? Because technically, the elevator is the equivalent of wearing a hearing aid in terms of it's an assistive device, and same as the wheelchair. And if you could technically get from ground 1 to ground 2, level 2, you've just gotten upstairs in the goal, but that would be ridiculous. It's the same ridiculousness of wearing a hearing aid as, quote, curing a hearing loss. You still have a hearing loss. NIH did a study and they came up with a vastly different number of 72.88 million. That is a big thing. There is no studies really about children with hearing loss, and there's also no organization really representing children with hearing loss. And there's no political or major advocacy organization for hearing loss. There's a community-based organization, but they are not political, and they say they don't have lobbyists. So this is part of what creates the complications for obtaining hearing access and getting hearing aids.
Wow.
Told you it was way more complicated. It
Yeah.
seems like such a benign question, and it's something that is so complicated.
Right. So, if you do a search, according to the National Institute of Deafness and Other Communication Disorders, it's called NIDCD, they say 15% of American adults, or roughly 38 million over 18, have some trouble hearing. And 2 to 3 out of 1,000 kids have trouble hearing. But we all know that hearing is affected the older you get, and so there's a larger group in the over 60 than under 60. But it's what I'm hearing from you is it's not well calculated, it's not well reported. The statistics are soft, so that would be an interesting area for more research. So Janice,
Actually, the census just pulled their questions for the Washington group. I submitted comments, and the issues I raised were some of the reasons that they pulled the questions, because the non-obvious disabilities pushed back against the obvious disabilities who were undercounted. People with autism weren't even being counted in the data, which is frankly absurd.
Wow. So if we could just look at current policies and legislation. I know there's the Americans with Disabilities Act, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, Hearing Aid Compatibility Act. Can you talk to any one of those or any other areas of policy or legislation that you're focusing on?
I can't, again, everything I'm focusing on, or I can't discuss what's going the agency at work. But I can say that for other areas, let's say Department of Transportation, my focus is making sure there is effective communication for people with hearing loss in transportation. One of the areas that has been a problem is this perception that people with hearing loss don't need to hear the sound. And how do you hear the sound that's being communicated in an airport, for example? So if you're in an airport and there's a gate change and they make an announcement, people with hearing loss can't hear the announcements. I filed a 504 complaint with LaGuardia Airport because when they renovated the airports, they didn't add something called an induction loop. An induction loop brings sound directly to a person's hearing aid or cochlear implant when they switch to the T or telecoil. This is used in airports globally. And LaGuardia Airport only added it to their customer service desk, which was ridiculous, as if anyone goes to the customer service as their main point. And they're going to the gate, and plus that means you also have to check in first, go to your luggage, and do everything before you even reach the customer service, which is actually absolutely ridiculous. And when I filed a complaint, I was told by the FAA there was not a line item in the ADA that specifically said they had to, and I'm paraphrasing, but that they had to add an induction loop. Yet recently, Health and Human Services in their Section 504 revision, and again, I'm paraphrasing, basically said, we can't mention everything, and just because something's not mentioned doesn't mean it's not there. And the two really are diametrically opposed to each other. And I happen to have recently sat next to the president's chief of staff, Jeffrey Zients, and I went to him and when I sat next, I asked him, this doesn't make any sense. Now we're in a position where there's now going to be an election. So this is a very almost lame duck time, because if you change anything, the next president can change it back. So and then we have to see what's going to happen in the election. But for me, this is very concerning. You have the FAA saying one thing, HHS saying something else, and people with hearing loss stuck in the middle. And how does someone with a hearing loss who already has difficulty communicating or maybe hearing, and I was doing this via email, so it was all paper trailed, how does someone challenge this? And as you know, I've been doing this for 22 years. I've been really successful. And if I'm now hitting this wall, I don't see how anyone can, I don't really know what the answer is. And that's what I asked, what is the answer to this? Is it, who's wrong? HHS or FAA? But someone has to be, because meanwhile, it's not in the LaGuardia Airport. And meanwhile, LaGuardia Airport received federal funds.
Right.
And how were they discriminating against people with hearing loss and just thinking, and also telling someone wear a daisy is just ridiculous. It's just absurd. President Clinton has a hearing loss. Mayor Bloomberg has a hearing loss. He is not going through the airport with a daisy to receive help. It's like treating a person with a disability like a child. And the whole point of the ADA was to stop treating people with disabilities like children and infantilizing them.
Right.
And yet, maybe the daisy works for some people, but if I have a hearing loss, I'm not wearing a daisy. And that's not to minimize or ridicule anyone who chooses to do that. It's a personal choice. I am just not wearing a daisy, and I don't want someone telling me that is the only way I can receive access. And it's also ridiculous. If the access is not there, I don't understand what the person who responds to a person with a daisy, how they get the sound into a person's hearing aids without the induction loop.
So
there's a disconnect between what people with disabilities or hearing loss actually need. And some of these solutions are feel good. Some solutions work better for other disabilities, but they're not solutions for all disabilities.
So Janice, just explain to the audience a daisy.
So the daisy is supposed to, and I am not minimalizing daisies. I want to be really clear about that because they are very effective for some people. The daisy identifies a person that they have a disability and then communicates to service workers, let's say in an airport, that that person may need assistance. But that access and that solution does not work for all disabilities. It works for some disabilities. And what it has become is that some people now think that is wearing the daisy identifies you. It does not solve the problem, right? It doesn't suddenly provide you access. And there's this like, oh, we have a daisy. And
So
now
I would make a couple of comments. I really appreciate you opening our eyes to this, or opening our ears, I should say. As eye doctors, one thing that caught my attention right away is I can imagine saying to my patients, do you have a serious eye problem or a serious visual loss? I mean, that's so subjective that would be impossible. I mean, that would be literally impossible for someone to find. And then the second part is, one thing I would say in flights, I mean, I know the apps now are very good at saying you've had a change in your gait and you change in time. And so, I mean, I think that would be something that would be really helpful to work with disabilities and the airport to see that everyone gets that app. I would think that would be helpful, correct?
it does, but
Maybe I get an app and I get a reminder of the flight change. Like I don't even listen because a lot of times I can't even hear them. They mutter it and it's not a great system. But I really do think you're bringing up really valuable things, not just for hearing loss, but for all disabilities, that it's really, there's just a lot of things out there that are not wonderful or perfect for people with these issues and not satisfactory.
and you need redundancy. So while the apps are great, and I rely on the apps as well, what happens if your phone dies?
Absolutely.
Right. And many of us have been in that position where we see that yellow bar and we're like, oh no, like, what are we going to do? Right. And so you need to have redundancies. And there are people also with multiple disabilities. And so some people can, see and they need the hearing. And by having redundancies, and my theory is if the sound is unnecessary, then shut it for everyone. But don't tell people that want to hear the sound, they can't because it's not important for them, but it is important for other people. So, if it's the induction loops are the ramps for people with hearing loss. And just if it's not important, shut it for everyone. And then there's no more issue. But when you say that to somebody, for example, let's move it from the airport to now we're in a museum, right? You go to a museum and there's a video and they have captions. Captions require you to sit and stare at a screen, which can be, frankly, very exhausting. And if you're listening, it's very different because when you're listening, you're able to also watch the screen differently than when you're reading the captions and trying to view the screen. And so many times museums will not provide an induction loop and they will say, well, just read the captions. So my response is, okay, if captions are good, then shut the sound for everybody. Yeah. And their response is, oh no, we need the sound. It's really important. Okay, why is it important? It adds effects, right? And you can hear the volume.
From hearing that people say you can do things without hearing. So for sure, you're not supposed to drive a car with your earbuds in. You're not supposed to ride a bike in Manhattan with your earbuds in because your sound is very important. I know as a tennis player, if I play tennis and it's very loud around, I can't hear the ball hit the racket. It's very difficult. So there's a lot of things that you use sound to help your reflexes, to help how you react to your environment. So your point is well taken.
That's a great point. And I'm going to incorporate it. That is an excellent point.
The other thing I was thinking about is the subway and buses, which I know I have a place in New York City. I mean, yes, they can look at their subway map and they can look at things, but a lot of times they announce the stops. So again, those are things that could be better for sure. Like I could tell you it's inconsistent. Some subways have every stop outlined visually for people and they make a big deal when you get to a stop, but it could be so much better.
Exactly. And, Amtrak is adding the induction loops to its new cars that should be arriving shortly.
Yeah.
So the problem is there's inconsistency across the federal government and
Yeah.
across states and cities about what it is that people with hearing loss should have. And so I would like to see consistency
Yeah.
across the DOT, HHS, and places, of course, excluding my agency, because I'm not talking about them, but across the other thing I'm working on is on hearing aids. Hearing aids are not tested. They pass under the functional equivalency standard, and they're also not rated. So no one has any idea what they're purchasing, and it's a misnomer to believe that audiologists do because the information doesn't exist. Plus, they prescribe and sell, which, as you know, is a conflict of interest, and we have stopped that with pharma. And I don't understand if pharma had to stop that, why audiologists are allowed to do this. Hearing aids are about hearing. We need to focus on the end user. It is not about job retention. And sometimes people think hearing aids is about employment of audiologists. It's about people hearing, and people should know what they're spending. Hearing aids cost upwards of $8,000, and no one knows what they're buying. And even the new over-the-counter hearing aids, which I helped initiate, nobody knows what they're buying. And I'm seeing people who are very dissatisfied with their hearing aids, and they'll say, well, what do I buy? I'm like, I have no idea. And the FDA's response to my petition that people should rely on anecdotal evidence is preposterous. Again, like, who does that, right? Like, I'm supposed to rely on the person in like my supermarket for information. Like when I buy hearing aids, like that makes no sense. I would like to see the international ANSI standards, ANSI, rating hearing aids using generic names for features, and then people could tell and select the features they need and pick the ratings. Maybe you don't go out as often. Then you may not care about like noise canceling in a restaurant, right? Or noisy situations if you're staying your homebody, right? But you should be empowered and understand what you're purchasing. And the ADA was about giving people independence, and people should have independence and knowledge about what they're spending $8,000 on. As Cy Sim said, the retailer in New York, an educated consumer is our best customer, and I believe that's really true.
So where are you from?
New York, can't you tell? And
I grew up 10 minutes from Sims. That was a great line.
It was a great line. I told his daughter, Marcy Sims, who I met at Harvard, that she was at one of the events, and she loved it that I quoted her father into my FDA comments and testimony.
That's great, Janice. So let's talk about some challenges and gaps in the policy. You gave a nice talk on a bunch of related issues, but let's talk about gaps in coverage, either insurance coverage for hearing aids in many plans, including many plans, health insurance plans, including Medicare, accessibility issues for folks maybe with not a lot of resources, and I know I'm asking you a lot, but if you could also tie in employment challenges and discrimination, is that something you can cover?
Oh yeah, but we're going to need a lot of time. So I'll start with hearing aid coverage. And actually, this was part of the email I sent to the president's chief of staff. Even federal Blue Cross Blue Shield, right, which is one of the best health insurance plans, bar none, hearing aids are only covered $2,500 every 5 years. Now, if hearing aids are $8,000, that's how much my daughter paid. That barely covers one hearing aid. Even if you use your federal spending plan, that's give or take, I don't remember the exact number, 3,100, you carry over, and that's assuming you have no other medical issues. And even if you carry, the max you can carry is about 600. You could carry over from the previous year, assuming you had no medical, that's about 3,700, right? So basically, you have 2,500 and then carrying that 3,700, that is not even coming close to your $8,000 hearing aids. I believe this is not only a problem for the vast majority of people, and this plan is, by the way, not very different than a lot of plans across the country. where one hearing aids are covered to $2,500. People can't afford hearing aids. Hearing aids should not be the status symbol of the rich. People are purchasing inferior hearing aids. They have no idea what they're purchasing. They don't want to spend because they don't know what they're purchasing. They hear from their friends they're not happy, so they're unwilling to spend because it is so much out of pocket. So they're not. So they're either buying hearing aids that don't work, that they don't know how it works. They're not buying a hearing aid at all, or they're buying a subpar hearing aid and muddling through. Unaided hearing loss causes dementia. The cost of dementia is exponential, right? Early death, it's just an unbelievable expense. People need hearing aids. Medicare does not even cover hearing aids, which is absolutely ridiculous. By the way, 30% of obese.
One thing I'm going to interrupt you for, because we're eye doctors. You probably don't know this, but the government doesn't cover you to be refracted for.
I do know that. I don't understand that. $75 every time. I don't understand that.
It's the most important thing we do as eye doctors, and insurance companies don't cover it. And most insurance companies don't cover eyeglasses. Different is glasses, you don't have to spend $8,000. I mean, I think that's cost prohibitive for so many people. So many of my patients have hearing issues. They don't have hearing aids.
I don't understand the refraction either, because how do you get glasses without a refraction test? And every time I go, I discuss this with the eye doctor because I don't understand this either. But I only have so many hours of my day and I'm working. I'm leaving that to you guys. But it's something.
I'm just pointing it out to our
No, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. And I ask this every time they tell me I have to sign the piece of paper because they want to know that, they give you on notice. But so you have these gaps in healthcare coverage. I also believe that impacts. So again, excluding where I work, but all the other agencies, if you are a federal worker in all the other agencies, let's say like transportation, and you can't afford hearing aids, how are you supposed to care about people with hearing aids getting the access they need if you can't afford a hearing aid?
Correct.
So how is this person supposed to write legislation if they're not wearing a hearing aid and don't understand hearing because they can't afford it? That's a problem. Now, what's even more crazy is the VA does test hearing aids. So while the FDA says they can, the VA does. And I know that thanks to our classmates who connected me to the secretary of the VA. They do test it exactly the way I want them to test it. So how come the VA can test hearing aids and the rest of us don't have that access? So this impacts, and when people can't hear, they leave employment because they suddenly start making mistakes because they're not hearing information. And that's a problem. I'm unaware of any federal office that has induction loops in their conference rooms, in their entrance to enter the building. When you go to places like the Capitol, the main theater for even tourists, and the movie doesn't have any sort of assistive listening system for people to hear. There's only captions. You go to the National Archives and you go to hear about the Magna Carta. Nope. No, or something in that room. I don't think it's the Magna Carta. I think it's about police brutality or something. There's no induction loop. So, but yet some federal buildings do. And even the National Park Service, who I helped to write the guidelines, some parks have it. Some parks don't. I filed a complaint the National Park in American Samoa that didn't have it. And then their perception is, well, we're going to put in something that requires wearing a headset. But people with hearing loss are already wearing receivers on their ears. They don't want to wear an additional device. And it's not only do they not want to wear it because it's potentially stigmatizing, it also discloses their disability. And according to the Department of Education, I think it's the Department of Education's 504, you should be using something that doesn't disclose someone's disability because it's their personal, it's kind of like you're asking people to self-disclose. Sure. For children with disabilities going on a school trip, which go to the national parks, that's problematic. But again, that's the Department of Education. That varies. Department of Labor 504 also has, I believe, I'm doing this off the top of my head, similar, but other agencies do not. And there's a lack of consistency. And part of the problem is people with hearing loss don't necessarily aren't participating in the writing of this legislation. And the perception is that you don't necessarily have to have the disability to write the legislation, but you do need a perception. You need to have that lived experience and understanding the issues and the nuances in the disability. There's a phrase, not about us, without us. And disabilities are not interchangeable. And the perception that if you raise that, it's a problem, that's problematic, because what it does is it precludes people with hearing loss getting the access they need and they want, because a different disability may be precluding it. And there's the ranking of disabilities and the scarcity of funding and ranking and perceptions of who gets funding and who doesn't. That's a problem. It shouldn't be where disabilities are ranked over. I had someone say to me that, hearing loss is not a severe disability. That's a real problem. And, we shouldn't have ranking of disabilities. But when there is scarcity of funds, then that's what happens. Who gets the money and who doesn't? I mean, that's a problem within our society, right? Who gets the money and who doesn't?
Yeah, and that's where call to action for better policy support comes into play, as well as advances and innovations. I'm just riffing right now, but I'm thinking of Neuralink and Elon Musk with implants to get a Bluetooth chip into your head so that you can move your mouse and your cursor on a computer. I mean, he's talking about helping people see who have optic nerve injuries or have cortical strokes. I mean, who knows what's going to happen? That certainly can impact hearing as well as the other senses. But so Janice, I mean, you have been involved in a call to action. You've advocated, and really, I would say you're the poster kid for advocacy for hearing loss and hearing disability, and we applaud you. But how can you further promote awareness and understanding for our audience? Is there anything that our community can do with our legislators or any other group that our audience can get involved with? In conclusion, I suppose.
Well, thank you so much. Yes, I think it's really, I think it's too trite to say righteous legislator, but I do think writing Senator Warren, and Senator Grassley, who were the, people who led the over-the-counter hearing aids, and they did a marvelous job. But we made incredible progress, and they made incredible progress. But now we need to do the next step. We need to ask Senator Warren and Senator Grassley, we need ratings for hearing aids. We need to ask Secretary Buttigieg, we need him to add induction loops to transportation. I mean, these are very doable solutions. And if you go onto my personal website, janicelintz.com, you'll see my federal comment on to the secretary, or that I filed when they requested federal comments. And there's, go onto the federal regulations or send Secretary Buttigieg saying you support Janice Lintz's comment. Read the comment. I'm happy to send you for a link to support this. Send the senators asking them to rate hearing aids. We need to rate hearing aids and know what people are purchasing. And I'm happy to send you the links for both my FDA testimony and my DOT comment for your listeners.
Good. Yeah, send me those.
Very
I'll put
helpful.
them on the website. Janice, once again, thank you so much. Thank you to our audience for listening.
Very informative.
Yeah, thank you, John. And Janice, as technology advances and innovations happen, we would love to have you back just to make us aware of what's going on. But yeah,
Hopefully with good updates about progress also.
I hope so too, and I'd love to. I hope, I think it's going to make a big difference what happens in the fall, and but we'll see what happens. I mean, this is a very I'm hopeful. I think we always have to stay optimistic that this can, and I really have been proof that one person can make a difference. And I think part of the issue is that people think they can't make a difference and they can't affect change. And it is really possible. I mean, the photo I'm sitting in front of is the New York City taxi that has the induction loop. And when I spearheaded that, I just saw this as a mom with my daughter in London. And I was like, wow, I had never seen this. And I got the CAD drawings and I brought it to the New York Taxi Limousine Commission. And I should tell you, won the medallion was threatening my life. I mean, it was really crazy. And he's like, this is not going to happen over my dead body. And he said, and like, I really, you'll die before this happens. I was like, oh, okay. But I wasn't going to, it was so crazy. I was shaking. I was with someone who's now since passed away, but I was like shaking. I was like, oh my God, this is induction loops. This is not like really, this is not where you threaten people's lives. But this guy was really intimidating. But I would realize like I was not going to, I have been intimidated repeatedly as I have pushed forward. And I mean, I think Carl, we had some classmates who were not kind, and I stood up to them, and I was, because disabilities in different parts of the world are viewed very differently. And I think people can do it, and you just have to stand up to the naysayers and never, ever go away. And I think that's the thing. When you don't go away and you stand up to them, it gets done. Because if you keep showing up, they eventually want to get rid of you. And I think sometimes that's what happened. I mean, I had the access into the Smithsonian. It took me 22 years, but I kept showing up.
No, Janice, you're 100% right. I do remember, and you were inspiring. Your tenacity. So I salute you.
Thank you, Carl. You're amazing, and thank you.
But listen, thank you to the audience. Please like and subscribe. And Janice, once again, we'll have you back, but we'll see you in the next one.
Great, thank you.